Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, as the group known as ISIL continues to make headlines with acts of violence in the name of Islam, should Muslims be expected to speak up and respond? So we always know when a conversation we've got started ahead of the show is going to be a busy one online because the community has done what, Malika Bilal?
Oh, that's a good way to put it. They have responded in
Wow.
droves.
Yes.
So we have 400 plus comments on Facebook on this topic. We have several video comments and hundreds of tweets with people weighing in their thoughts.
Right.
I want to give you just a little taste of what people are saying. This is a video comment sent to us from Hamza.
As a Muslim, I can safely say that the absolute vast majority of Muslims, 99.9999%, do not see the Islamic State as Islamic, nor do they recognize it as a state.
That's one view. We want to hear from you as well. So tweet us your questions and comments with hashtag AJStream.
So joining us in the studio, we have Imam Suhab Webb, and the Imam is an activist and lecturer with his very own online mosque. Imam, it's great to see you in the flesh. Welcome back to the studio.
It's good to be here.
And we will hear much more from you in just a moment. So, before we get started, here are some of the hashtags that have been used online to keep tabs on this story. By now, I'm sure you're familiar with the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL, the armed group that's currently fighting its way through Syria and Iraq. Now, earlier this year, it declared itself as a caliphate, that's an Islamic state set up between Syria and Iraq, with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi as self-proclaimed caliph, meaning leader for Muslims everywhere. Since their emergence, ISIL has been in the spotlight, often committing violent acts in the name of Islam. So far this year, the group claims it's beheaded 2 American journalists, 2 British aid workers, and executed Lebanese and Syrian soldiers. So with all eyes on ISIL, the Muslim community has come under pressure to respond. Online, many Muslims are using competing social media campaigns to debate what that response should be. So today, we're going to explore some of those conversations. With us to help us do that, we're joined by Rabia Chowdhury. She's a National Security Fellow at the New America Foundation. And also Mehdi Hassan, he's Political Director at Huffington Post UK and host of Head to Head right here on Al Jazeera. So welcome on board, everybody. Mehdi, this idea of obligation that you're a Muslim, you're a good Muslim, you have to do something because ISIL is in Syria and Iraq doing terrible things. What's your take?
I think the word obligation is a good word to use to kick off the discussion, because that's where people chafe, that's where people resist. Because we're all in favor of condemning bad things. Why wouldn't we be? Anyone with a morality, with a common sense, with a heart, who sees atrocities happening abroad, wants to say this is wrong, this is un-Islamic, this is immoral, whatever it is. I think the sense of obligation, this sense that non-Muslims or Muslims themselves are ordering other people that you must do this, you must say this at a specific time. That's where it gets tricky, because that's where you get into a realm of collective responsibility. That's where you get into a sense of scapegoating. And, you know, I'm happy to say, you know, ISIL are totally un-Islamic. They're neither Islamic nor they're a state. They don't represent the vast majority of Muslims, etc., etc., as your correspondent Hamza said in his video. But what I won't do is, if somebody comes to me and says, you must apologize for ISIL or you must condemn ISIL, I won't be part of the condemnathon that arises every time there's some kind of atrocity involving Muslims anywhere, and suddenly we're all to blame. You know, I'm not to blame for what ISIL is doing.
Imam?
I agree wholeheartedly with brother Mehdi. I think what we've seen in the last few weeks, especially in America, is that this is draining capacity for building our own communities. We get caught up in denouncing things that happen overseas, and it puts, I mean, leaders. I was attacked on Fox News 2 weeks ago. We become, because we haven't apologized in the way that people want us to apologize, so now we're being criticized for not apologizing.
How do people want you to apologize?
Well, that's the good question. So, you know, there was a local leader in Washington, D.C., his name is Mu'tasim Atiyah. He actually put an article together, and he said, how many times do we need to apologize for ISIS? And he listed like 50 or 60
organizations and imams who immediately denounced ISIS, and you're saying, what type of apology do you want?
Yeah.
Reacting to, I think her name is Gretchen, I believe, on Fox News, saying that, I want an apology my way. And his response was, how many apologies do you need? So I agree with Mehdi that when there's one thing to feel an obligation to denounce what we're seeing, but then for that to be used as a collective judgment on a community and then conditioned in a way that if I don't apologize according to the way you want, then my apology is still not valid. That's very problematic.
I want an apology from Fox News for George W. Bush.
Oh, okay, we're straying off topic just a little bit. Let's get back onto topic. Thank you for that, Mehdi. Malika, help us out here.
I have someone online who I would think disagrees slightly with what the Imam said and what you said, Mehdi. This is Ramon. He wrote to us on Facebook saying silence is consent. And there's a video comment from someone who says he's Muslim, and this is his view. Rabia, have a listen to this.
The question is whether it's fair for the public at large to expect ordinary Muslims to differentiate themselves from the extremists in Iraq. Now, I'm a Muslim, and my question to fellow Muslims is, why wouldn't you? Can you not see the enormous damage that ISIL is having on the name of Islam? Can you not see that they're completely tarnishing the image of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him? And if so, is it not our duty to proactively defend Islam rather than reactively condemn the backlash?
Rabia, is it the duty of a Muslim to do so?
I think, first of all, I want to just make the distinction between apologies and condemnations, and there's a place for condemnations but not apologies in this conversation. In terms of like an individual responsibility, I think it's really unreasonable and irrational to expect the average Muslim, whether they're in the UK, America, where have you, to be making this part of their everyday discussion or everyday activities. They're not going to be going to their neighbors and knocking on doors and saying, hi, I'm here to condemn ISIS. Having said that, there is a role for community leaders, for organizations to have a certain voice on this, and there are multiple reasons that I personally believe that it is important to have to be on top of these issues, to condemn things that should not be associated with Islam, to condemn things that hurt Muslims more than any other community.
All right,
but can I chime in?
Yeah, go ahead,
because
Emma.
The assumption of Ramon and the other brother is that there's silence. What I think Mehdi and I are saying is that there hasn't been silence.
Sure, true.
There have been clear, rebuttals of ISIS from. In fact, in the Arab world, they don't call them the Islamic State; they call them Daesh, which means criminals.
Yes, and I've heard that phrase.
So I think we're confusing here silence with condemnation. There's been plenty of condemnation, but people want to tailor-make that condemnation and then use that as a litmus test to say who's a good Muslim and who's a bad Muslim.
All right, Mehdi, hold tight for 1 second. Let me just play something here, because what Imam was saying and what you were agreeing with is that there has been condemnation, plenty of it. Here's some Muslim leaders from around the world, both sides of the Atlantic, and this is what they had to say about ISIL. Have a listen to this.
Brothers and sisters, if I could tell you in one sentence about ISIS, I would say they're evil, they're corrupt, they are self-seeking, self-centered, vicious people.
They don't represent the religion. They're not qualified to represent the religion.
They exploit my faith, and this is very offensive to all Muslims, and we speak against it.
They are trying to create corruption and fitna within the Muslim world.
The largest group of victims of ISIS have been Muslims, so they are a threat to us as much as they are a threat to any other communities.
So fitna, for anybody who's not a Muslim, fitna is trouble. Mehdi, I know you wanted to jump in. What did you want to say?
I just wanted to say, someone wrote recently, I can't remember who, very beautifully, that, for someone who says that Muslims don't condemn terrorism enough, or ISIS enough, or whatever it is, Al-Qaeda enough, it says more about that person than it does about Muslims. It says that person doesn't read newspapers, watches only Fox News perhaps, doesn't know any Muslims in their own social circle or in their workplace or university. Because anyone who does read newspapers, who does bother to listen to Muslim imams, who does know Muslims in their social circle, knows that 99.9% of Muslims do condemn ISIS or ISIL or IS, or whatever they call themselves. And that is a fundamental problem here, that no matter how much we speak out and condemn, but there will always be those who say, oh, well, they haven't done it enough. And this will happen after 9/11, and after 9/11, maybe you could have made an argument 13, 14 years ago that Muslim organizations weren't proactive enough. Maybe, but not today. Not in the world of Facebook and Twitter and WhatsApp, etc. It takes 2 seconds to discover how much outrage and condemnation there is towards that brutal group.
It's interesting. It takes 2 seconds. You can look at our Twitter feed and you'll see that as well. You'll see the condemnation and really Muslims in our community who are saying they're tired of this and they're tired of defending this. So, Imam, I actually want to go to a point that Rabia mentioned a little bit earlier, and that was the differentiation between a condemnation and apologizing. So Kamran on Twitter says, I would never apologize for their actions. They don't represent me. In Islam, he uses the hashtag not in my name. Sharina extrapolates on that and she says, apologize? Of course not. Condemn? Yes. It's like asking if Americans should apologize for drone attacks in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Do you see a difference between those two things?
No, I think that brother and that sister are speaking from a prophetic voice. That's a voice of justice. But to and kind of going back to what Mehdi said, I think post 9/11 was due to institutional incompetence. And then secondly, you don't have the massive structure of communication that you have now. Now institutions in the West are still mediocre, they're still anemic to some degree, but they've improved. And then what they're saying is absolutely correct. Why do I need to apologize for something I don't agree with in the first place? After the Boston bombing, I was on NPR, and a person said to me, you're responsible for this, this is your community. And I said, no, this is not my community, these are people who tried to kill somebody. I don't have any empathy for that. Right. So I think condemnation, and I think Rabia is a beautiful, beautiful nuanced point there, that we can condemn things, and we can talk about also the problem of demonizing even ISIS's followers online. I don't think that's healthy. I think we need to engage them and speak to them. But doing it in a way that other people want us to do is a problem.
How do you do that, Imam?
Well, I mean, as a theologian, my job would be to engage in kind of the theological arguments behind ISIS.
Right.
You can't talk about theology when you're screaming at each other or debasing each other or ridiculing each other. I'm not here to teach you or educate you, right? I'm here to learn, and you're here to learn, and we're going to try to build a conversation. Right. In my experience in 17 years of talking with young Muslims who have been kind of bought into this methodology, a lot of them have daddy issues. I'll be honest with you. There's financial issues, there's psychological problems, sexual abuse. And being a sincere friend has been far more effective, and then building trust to answer their theological concerns.
Sure. Mehdi, I hear you nodding in agreement.
Yeah, it's interesting, just on the earlier tweet from one of your correspondents who said it's like asking Americans to apologize for drone strikes. What's interesting about that is actually you could make an argument that Americans should apologize for drone strikes in the sense that it's carried out by an elected government, by a president that they chose, in a way that ISIS are not elected by anyone.
Right.
And therefore that nobody's responsible for ISIS, but you could actually, if you were Pakistani, you could say, actually, I do demand an apology from the American public for electing a president who sent drones into our country. I'm just making that point about apology versus condemnation. Absolutely. I would also say, I made a joke earlier about Bush and Fox News, and you said we were straying off topic. There is actually a serious point here which Muslims feel really frustrated by, I know I do, which is the singling out of Muslims as a community when it comes to crimes and the collective response, which we don't do with other communities. So Sam Harris, you mentioned Bill Maher earlier. Sam Harris, the atheist, who was on the Bill Maher show last week or the week before, and made these points about Islam and violence and, apologies for violence. He's a great fan of Buddhism. I don't ask Sam Harris to apologize for what Buddhists are doing towards Muslims in Burma or in Sri Lanka. I don't ask Christians to apologize for what George Bush and Tony Blair, both very evangelical Christians, did in Iraq. And it's only ever Muslims who are asked to apologize or condemn in this way. I can't think of any other faith community.
And we're not asking Buddhists to apologize for Sam Harris.
No, we're not.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What is it? What is it then? Yeah, what is it? Because I know all three of you experience this. What is it that makes non-Muslims ask Muslims to apologize for things that they are not directly responsible for, even indirectly? Rabia?
Can I have come to the conclusion that it might not be so much about why aren't you condemning. The real issue might be for people who ask that question is, what are you doing? What are Muslims doing? To that extent, for example, even in what's happening with ISIS or ISIL in the region, the question would be, what are Muslim majority nations doing to combat this? There's questions on why aren't there protests and things of that sort. I think that's really the bigger question people are asking is, are we taking this serious as a community? Is it a concern of ours, and are we acting on something? And I don't think those are necessarily fair questions, but I think that might be what people are trying to get at.
And do they have, is there an answer that you can give them? They're watching this show right now and saying, okay, I've seen people being beheaded, I've seen the Yazidis being driven out of northern parts of Iraq, I've seen all these things. What's happening within the Muslim community?
You know what's happening? Sorry.
What's happening? Go ahead. Mehdi?
I was going to say, you know what's happening in Muslim countries? Muslims are fighting and dying to prevent extremism. Pakistan has lost tens of thousands of civilians and soldiers. The Iraqi army has suffered massive massacres. The Kurdish Peshmerga, including female fighters, are laying down their lives to protect the rest of the region from ISIL's advance. Across the world, Muslim majority world, Muslims are actually the number one victims of groups like this, but they're also the people who are also fighting back, and including in the West, as you saw with those videos you just played. That those were imams against ISIS in the UK, was a very strong initiative from Sunni and Shia imams across the UK. So again, it comes back to this issue of the people who are asking these questions. It's really about them and their ignorance, their hate, their desire to divide and to cut us all into slice and dice us. It's really about them. It's not about us.
But can I just add that, I mean, these are all points that I made in my recent piece about Bill Maher, that these are the things Muslims are doing. Having said that, I think the problem is that I also put place the blame at the feet of the media, which is not covering the things that our Muslims are doing. So, if somebody is what they're consuming from the media is showing a very limited picture of how Muslims are involved in this, then that's also an issue. We need broader media coverage of what Muslims are doing.
All right, let me just say, because Mehdi mentioned a couple of things of what's happening in the Muslim world, so to speak. Let me show you here on my computer, because a lot of the people who are dying that ISIL are actually attacking are actually Muslims. Yep. So here we've got this headline here: Human Rights Watch verifies ISIL massacre images from Iraq. One more. This is very disturbing, so let me just share you this with you, but tell you it is disturbing. This is a tweet that talks about ISIS beheading another Lebanese soldier, apparently a Shia one. So as Mehdi said, Muslims are also being attacked by ISIL.
Femi, that's a tweet you showed.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Iraqi cameraman who at the weekend was beheaded by ISIS because he refused to work for them.
There were
Where
so
was his
many,
picture
Mehdi.
on the front of
Yeah.
Where was his picture on the front of all the West newspapers?
Sure.
We cover these images when Western journalists and Western aid workers are being killed brutally and outrageously, and rightly so. We should cover that. We don't cover the Muslim victims of violence. And in fact, let's be honest, the whole world has only become excited about ISIS in the last few weeks because they're beheading Western aid workers and Western journalists, not because they're beheading Muslims, which they've been doing for several months now, in fact, more than a year.
But we are seeing those stories on social media, which actually gives me a nice way to go back to Malika and the community.
Right. Well, what I'm seeing right now is people explaining what should be done within Muslim communities, and a lot of people online are talking about this greater Muslim, and I will put in quotes, world. So Kareem says, condemning extremist ideas, fighting extremism, for example, Arab countries' coalition against ISIL, and spreading the true word of Islam is what should be done. On Facebook, Sievert says, it is necessary for Muslims to condemn ISIS because the Western world doesn't know that there is no Muslim world. To Westerners, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia are the same Muslim world. It's stupid, he writes, but true. So, Imam, I know you wanted to get in there, but can you kind of explain what this idea of a Muslim world is and how diverse and different, really, Saudi Arabia is from Indonesia and why that matters?
Most definitely. I think also added to that, and this was what I was going to say a minute ago, is most of my family are non-Muslims, and I deal with non-Muslims weekly, daily. I don't think that it's fair to say most non-Muslims have this assumption that we need to apologize. I think we also need to be very careful. Many of the friends that I know are able to say to me that I don't need you to apologize for these people.
Smart people, educated people.
Or just homies. I mean, they might not be PhDs from Howard, but they're just intelligent people who have an ethical compass.
Yeah, so homies can be smart too, right?
Of course.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But in a different way.
Yeah.
I think the other point here is I think the idea of the Muslim world has become somewhat problematic because there was a recent New York Times op-ed that talked about, he was actually on the show with Bill Maher, that the Muslim world is not a monolith. Turkey is not Yemen, and Yemen is not Somalia. And then let's not forget that the Kurds, people keep saying the Kurds are under attack. The Kurds are Muslims.
Exactly.
And that's a genocide of these people. But I think within the American context, we have still failed to really identify what is the American Muslim or Western Muslim identity.
Right.
And until that happens, other people will be used to define who we are. So you see this ethos in the media.
Yeah.
ISIS is bad, so American Muslims are bad. Or Malala wins the Nobel Prize, so American Muslims are good. Well, why can't we look at Ziba Khan or Wajahat Ali or Harun Mogul or Hamza Yusuf or Yasir Qadi or Mehdi or Rabia? And that's, or Lupe Fiasco or Dave Chappelle.
So these are all Muslims around the world that you actually admire?
No, I'm saying that, that the Muslim American community or the Western community is being held to a world world definition of Islam because we don't have a definition of who we are.
Sure.
And Sheikh Ben Baya says an empty chair can't speak for you.
Sure. Let me just, because his name's come up so often in this conversation, I'm going to show a little bit from a comedy show on HBO called Real Time. It's presented by Bill Maher, who is a satirical comedian who said something at the end of September that really got everybody riled up. Let me just play you a little clip.
If vast numbers of Muslims across the world believe, and they do, that humans deserve to die for merely holding a different idea, or drawing a cartoon, or writing a book, or eloping with the wrong person, not only does the Muslim world have something in common with ISIS, it has too much in common with ISIS.
All right, so bearing in mind, this guy is a comedian. He wants a lot of attention, Mehdi, but it seems like there's a PR issue going on here about how outsiders are looking at Muslims. Do you subscribe to that?
In what sense? PR issue from whose perspective?
From their perspective.
Look, I mean, Bill Maher is an attention seeker, but let's take him a little bit more seriously, perhaps after, especially after the recent show. You showed a clip from end of September. What really went viral was a couple of weeks ago when he and Sam Harris, the atheist scientist who I mentioned earlier, basically went to war with Ben Affleck, the actor, who decided to become a hero in the Muslim world by standing up for Muslims and pointing out that most Muslims actually don't want to kill people. They just want to have their sandwich, go to work, eat their lunch, keep their heads down.
Yeah.
They're not political. They're not kind of interested in debates about theology. They just want to get on with their life like everyone else. And that was the big row. And the problem is that there is now a group of liberals. It's not just Fox News. It's not just the right. It's not just Christian evangelicals who are, going after Islam. There are liberals, self-styled card-carrying liberals who say Islam is against human rights, it's against gender rights, etc., etc., and therefore we must stand against them as liberals. And it's another divisive tactic because, of course, as the Imam mentioned earlier, most Americans, most Britons don't hold those views, and therefore it's just dividing communities further. My bigger problem with all of this rhetoric, of course, is that, again, the starting point is always Islam, Muslims. That's the narrative. Now you respond.
Yeah.
And I think the only way we're going to get through this is when Muslims actually try and change the narrative. The Imam mentioned talking about theology. I mean, I slightly worry about that because that almost accepts the point that this is a theological problem. In my view, it's not a theological problem. What the Imam said later was much more relevant, which is that a lot of these guys, they're messed up. They're from dysfunctional families. They're unemployed. They're looking for thrills. All of the studies that have been done by people like Mark Sageman and Robert Pape and Scott Atran, who've studied terrorist biographies, they say, look, religion has very little to do with this. This is to do with young men, mainly young men, going out looking for a cause, looking for something to give meaning to their lives, looking to use violence to advance theirs. And that's what we really need to talk about, not just talk about Islam, the Quran, the Hadith, blah-de-blah-de-blah.
And interesting enough, Richard Dawkins said this 2 days ago about the Middle East, that Islam is not the sole problem, that there's demoralized human beings.
Yeah.
The fallout of the Egyptian revolution and young people seeing, what do you want from us? Nationalism didn't work in Iran. Democracy doesn't work in Egypt.
Malika.
Well, I think what's
Rabia, hold tight for a moment. I'm just going to go to Malika. I'm going to wrap up this part of the show, take you all to the post show. So hold tight, hold that thought. Malika.
Well, hearing from our panel of Muslims, I want to give a view of someone who is not Muslim but tweeted us. Abishah says, I'd say definitely no, that Muslims are automatically conflated with ISIL. He says, in my circle of friends, we talk about ISIL's insanity, but the idea of connecting Muslims to ISIL, even to condemn them, never crossed our mind. And he's tweeting us from Ethiopia.
This conversation has so much more energy in it. We have the Imam, we have Mehdi, we have Rabia. Mehdi said, blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah. We're going to stop with the blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah, and we're going to have another conversation at stream.aljazeera.com. We're taking them all there to have that, so hopefully you can join us. Let me tell you about our next AJ stream. India's government wants to build 100 million toilets in the next 5 years. But why is there a debate about this? We will find out on the next AJ stream. Until then, I'll see you online with Mehdi, Rabia and Imam. Join us if you can. Thanks for watching. This is the Stream's online post show. We've been talking to an all-Muslim panel about whether or not Muslims should be expected to speak up against actions of groups like ISIL. The thing that bugs me here as the honorary Muslim is that I can't imagine we'd ever have a show about Christians need to respond to so-and-so. I can't imagine that would be the case. Why is it the case with this particular conversation we're having, Imam?
Well, I think there's a number of factors, but in general is the history that the West has had with Islam. Some of the paranoia that's out there. There's no more bigoted show than Homeland, I think, on television. And our concern is rooted in a...
And for people who've not seen Homeland, who are watching from around the world...
It's a television show on Showtime. It's not on Jazeera English, sorry. About, you know...
Reddy's like, yeah, it's a great show.
A person who served in the military and then came back and flipped, basically.
Okay.
And became a terrorist.
All right. So the reference is because what?
Well, I think that kind of highlights the ultimate terror the West could have with Islam. You have a military man who can completely forget his obligations and his loyalties to his country and do whatever. I mean, he kills the vice president in the second season or third season.
Right.
And I think
ruin it for people.
Yeah, sorry for the. I could have. Yeah, sorry about that. But I think that leads to a broader rhetoric of the fear of it, that Islam is here to destroy you, take away your values, and uproot your culture.
Rabia.
No, you know, I wanted to kind of turn the conversation internally. We've been talking a lot about what the expectations from the external outside the Muslim community are, but one of the things that I think has come up time and time again in relation to this conversation and other things is then who speaks for the Muslim community? We've had kind of an anti-condemnation movement. There are people who don't believe that even our organizations should be repeatedly condemning things, and they say, well, you know, you don't. Who speaks for us? And that was a conversation that I'm hearing a lot more.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it's a really misleading conversation, because I think what it does is it kind of pigeonholes Muslims in the same way that a show like Homeland does, which is that it is one monolith. So the idea that there should be any kind of discrete group of people or a person or an organization that just speaks for all Muslims is really disingenuous, and it limits what really should be happening, which is very, very diverse spectrum of voices need to be speaking and representing Muslims and representing the diversity of Muslims on these issues.
Rabia, I'm glad that you raised that. You said the question is who speaks for Muslims, and so online what we have seen are some calls for people calling for the quote-unquote moderate Muslims. So I'm going to play a video comment. This is from two people who start out their comments saying the same thing but end up at two very different conclusions. Mahdi, have a listen to this.
Islam needs reformers, not moderates. Reform comes from dissent. And when you have concepts like infallibility and a word-perfect book and prophet, any dissent is bound to be labeled heresy, blasphemy, or apostasy by definition. We're talking about what kind of conversation needs to happen, right? But how can you even have a conversation when there isn't even a safe forum for it?
Islam needs reformers, not moderates. The concept of a moderate Muslim is inherently redundant. But the reformation of Islam is not of the religion, it is of Muslims themselves.
So Mahdi, what is a moderate Muslim? Do you cringe at that like I do?
I do a little bit, because it's such a loaded phrase and it means different things to different people. I think to most people it means, you know, it used to mean non-violent. For example, in the UK it used to mean you're not a supporter of violence, you're not a supporter of Al-Qaeda, you don't want to blow stuff up. In recent years it's taken on a new meaning. Moderate Muslim means that you buy into all sorts of definitions about your faith, about social liberalism, that perhaps, you know, that the majority of people in the West accept and some Muslims don't. And, you know, there's a big debate about what it means to be moderate. Can you be a conservative Muslim and to be a moderate? In the UK we're having that debate right now. I think just to take on board the two commenters, to take on board the first commenters, look, I don't buy that argument. It's as ignorant as what a lot of the Islamophobes are saying, which is that there's no safe space. Look, that's nonsense. There is a safe space. Muslims are having it all across the country, all across the West, even in the Middle East. They are having debates about violence. They are having debates about some of these things. Look, that doesn't mean that there aren't problems in Muslim majority countries. Of course there are. There are horrible human rights abuses in Muslim majority countries. The thing is, those human rights abuses are a product of the political, social, economic scene as much, if not more so, than they are about the interpretation of Islam. And the second commenter who made the point about reformation, you know, I agree with him. I don't like the word reformation. You know, it's one I used to use myself, but let's be honest, you know, the reformation has also been carried out by some of these groups. ISIS would say they're reformers. They're taking Islam back to some kind of imagined golden age. We've got to be careful about the use of that phrase. But look, Muslims do have real problems. Rabia mentioned about internal debates and dialogue. Well, one of the problems I have in recent weeks is anytime I write about ISIS or ISIL and post about it on Facebook, literally the first or second comment is from a Muslim who says there's no such thing as ISIL, it's all Mossad, it's all the CIA. I think that's a real problem within Muslim communities, the denialism about the extent of extremism that exists out there. That's a whole separate debate.
Do you know what occurred to me as I've been watching this debate and following it online through social media and through various friends and colleagues is that there's an awful lot of ignorance about what it is to be a Muslim and what it means and what the faith actually teaches. Imam, is that because outsiders don't care to learn, or is that because maybe Muslims need to share a little bit more?
I think it's because Muslims need to learn. When we're talking about what is a moderate Muslim, to show you, first of all, there would never have been a monolithic definition in the time of the Prophet of what is a moderate Muslim. You know, Schellinger wrote a book in the early part of the 20th century called The Vital Sinner. You know, I think we need the vital sinner. And Dr. West, Cornel West, talks about that moderation is really just a catalyst to achieve a prophetic set of morals and morality. And what I'm trying to say is if someone were to study, our first commentator, the religion, say usul al-fiqh, the science of the philosophy of Islamic law, very clear he would see that there are aspects of Islam that are fixed. We pray 5 times a day, we fast in the month of Ramadan, we shouldn't kill and behead people. Those are things that don't change. But then there's this, actually some scholars said up to 90% of our practices are going to change according to time and place. So the moderate Muslim is evolving, but at the same time also there are aspects of that personality which are fixed. And let's be honest, sometimes we find American Muslim scholars are criticized by people from other countries based on cultural issues, not really religious, and vice versa. So I would say that there's an aspect of moderation, and I agree with Mehdi, it's a difficult term to define. That
what's a moderate Christian? How would you describe a moderate Christian?
Or fixed from an orthodox, the broadest orthodox perspective we can take. But then there's a majority of those areas where the person is evolving, their moderation is evolving.
And I would just add that, you know, I prefer the term normative or average Muslim, and that also changes depending on the region you're in, the time you're in. And I think the average Muslim is the moderate Muslim. I mean, it's not that complicated. It's also not that complicated. The question of, you know, what is Islam, what is Muslims? You either can look to what the majority of Muslims, how they behave and practice, or you can look to what the majority of scholars say about a certain topic. So it's really not as complicated as people want to make it.
Mehdi.
What's so frustrating, and the Imam mentioned it a moment ago about culture, is that if there is a problem associated with Muslims or in the Muslim majority world or in a Muslim community in the West, the first assumption, mainly by non-Muslim, but also by a lot of Muslims, is to look at the religion and say, well, what's the Islamic reason for this, or the Islamic cause for this? And we don't look at culture, we don't look at politics, we don't look at economics, we don't look at history. We conflate everything down to Islam. So to come back to something the guy in the video, one of your commenters said earlier about, you know, it's all about an infallible book that doesn't give you any space for debate. That assumes that in Egypt, for example, you're stopped from speaking out about human rights abuses because of your religion, or is it because the Egyptian military will come and throw you in prison? I mean, you've got to live in the real world. The real world is despots, dictators, armies, militias, trying to, grab power and using religion for instrumental purposes. Let's not buy into this nonsensical idea that the reason people are doing all this is because of religion. Because as Rabia says, then why aren't all of us doing it? Why aren't all 1.6 billion of us doing the stuff that ISIS and Al-Qaeda, etc. are doing?
Let me play you a little bit of this #NotInMyName campaign. It's put together by British Muslims, and have a look at this and tell me your thoughts on this about how social media may or may not be able to help this conversation. I know all of you live online and tweet up a storm.
Not in my name.
All right, #NotInMyName. Have you tweeted that out, Rabia?
No, I haven't tweeted that out. I feel like everything I do and write speaks for itself.
Yeah, right. What do you make of #Muslim apologies, #NotInMyName? Is it a great way for the conversation to go viral, perhaps?
I mean, the #Muslim apologies was really, as far as I understand, a reaction to the condemnations being done by Muslim organizations. So it was really, to me, not constructive. That particular campaign was not constructive.
But as a mode of delivery, Mehdi, Twitter, Facebook, is it helpful?
I think social media has transformed this whole debate. And interestingly enough, here in the UK, I was on the radio the morning after drummer Lee Rigby, the British soldier who was run down and murdered in the street by two extremists, by two criminals. I was on the radio the morning after, on BBC Radio the following morning, with Fraser Nelson, who is the conservative centre-right editor of The Spectator magazine, which is no friend of Islam or Muslims really, and he went out of his way to point out that forget Muslim community leaders. When the presenter was asking me about, have Muslims condemned this, the usual question, he actually butted in and said, you know what, we don't need Muslim groups or community leaders to do that anymore. Go on Twitter, go on Facebook. There are hundreds of them. And he then wrote a blog post in which he collated all of the Muslims in Britain who had gone on and condemned the killing within seconds, within minutes, pointing out to his readers, who are very conservative readers, not fans of Islam, that you know what, it's very clear where the Muslims stand on this, where British Muslims stand. So social media has transformed this whole debate.
Imam, I mean, you've got an online mosque, so to speak, so social media for you in this conversation in particular?
And I'm also an imam in Boston.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, that point that he made about not having a safe space. Last Friday, we had a town hall meeting on authority, how authority plays out in the Muslim community.
Yeah.
We had 250 people there talking about how could we restructure even the governance of mosques. So just to touch on that, I think back to the point about, I think all of these reactions online are very healthy, even if we don't agree with them, because they point to the fact that we're able to have a richer discussion. And in the Quran it says, "Udkhulu abwab mutafarriqa," I'll translate, of course, which means, Jacob said to his children, go into the city through different doors. It goes back to what Rabia talked about, the danger of a monolithic message vis-a-vis this very dynamic, I like the fact that it's almost not controllable message online within the Western community, at least my community, the American community, where you do have cynics, you have people who are for or against. That's something that we haven't had. And that is difficult to have in many Islamic centers, to be honest with you.
It also shows a sense of humor.
Oh goodness, we didn't even touch on the sarcasm and the sense of humor. We do not have time for that.
Angry and humorless has been disproved.
There's some great zingers out there.
By Muslim apologies and by Muslim rage.
Yeah, exactly.
We need to educate people.
Yeah, hashtag check it out. All right, Malika, wrapping up, giving you the last word here.
I will give the last word actually to Carolina on Twitter, and she said this was a great discussion and I wanted to hear more about it. So she included the Twitter handles of everyone who was on our show, and of course you can learn more about this as well using hashtag AJStream, because that's where the conversation will continue.
So Imam, Rabia, Mehdi, I am reluctantly letting you go about your business. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. Really appreciated your time today. So, moving on to the next show. India's government wants to build 100 million toilets in the next 5 years. But why is there a debate about this? We will find out on the next AJ Stream. See you soon.